Alright, so this used to be my favorite PC case, and honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I even started this channel. I was so obsessed with how good this thing was. The Ncase M1, I mean, at under 13 liters, it fit all of the fastest components. But that was also back when the best CPU and GPU pulled less than 400 watts combined. Now we have components that pull more than that alone. But also, we now have this thing here, which makes me feel like I've gone back in time and into the future all at once, because this is the Ncase M2, and it is the smallest PC case to fit every air-cooled 4090 on the market. It can also do 280mm liquid cooling, it can fit micro ATX motherboards and even ATX power supplies as well, all while being under 16 liters in volume. I mean, this thing is an absolute beast. But you put it next to the OG Ncase, which I've built in so many times, and it does look very, very different. The new one, first of all, the finish on this thing is unbelievably premium. If you're familiar with the latest Apple MacBooks and the ultra smoothed anodized and CNC finish on those, the new M2 basically has that as well. It is the nicest finish that I've seen on any PC case. That extra space as well has been put to some very good use. GPU compatibility particularly is absolutely insane in the M2. Cards like this, you know, the massive RTX 40 series Strix cards, which plainly just don't fit in a lot of other ITX cases out there, does actually fit in the M2. You do have to temporarily remove the front panel to squeeze it in there, but once it's in there, man, it is a really satisfying fit. Now, to put some context on how good that actually is, the M2 is smaller than the Fractal Mood, which I just reviewed, smaller than the NR200, it's even smaller than the Fractal Ridge. None of those cases as well can fit this GPU right here, which is kind of insane. And look, you can find smaller cards that will fit in those cases. You can, research the numbers and whatnot and make it work. I've done that many times. But in the M2, you just don't have to worry about it. As long as it doesn't have like a 360mm AIO attached to it, it will fit in this case. The bigger volume in the M2 also means that you can now do bigger radiators for liquid cooling. So wherever you could put a 240 in the M1, you can now do a 280mm in the M2. And I think it's also technically possible to do a triple radiator setup in this thing, believe it or not, which is absolutely mental, since you can now technically install a radiator at the top of the case. This is my old system in the M1, by the way, which I still keep up and running as a little backup. It's got a 12900K and an RTX 3090. Used this thing for quite a while. As you can see, it's quite dusty. But yeah, the reason I didn't put a 4090 in this thing is because I knew it would tip it over the edge in terms of like temperatures and cooling. But if I was to transfer all of this over to the M2 and then upgrade the radiators to 280mm ones, then that would definitely be enough cooling. Now, everything I've said about the new Ncase M2 up until this point has been like pretty cool, right? The build quality is like really nice and the roomy interior is much better for GPU compatibility, but you only have to take one look at the mind-bending motherboard tray on this thing to realize it's not a normal PC case. The Ncase M1, you can pretty much only do one layout. Sure, you can choose between liquid cooling or air cooling for your CPU, but your GPU and your motherboard are always going to be in the same spot. The M2, on the other hand, can do 3 completely different layouts with tons of flexibility and optimization in between. So firstly, we've got the classic layout, which is basically an Ncase M1, but just a bit more roomy and more optimized. Then you've got that but flipped, so motherboard is now upside down, which puts your GPU at the top, and this is a lot better for GPU thermals. But then, if you have a really big GPU like the ROG Strix, you can do a vertical GPU layout with this mini riser cable, and here you'll have a top-mounted 240 or 280mm AIO for your CPU. So one case, but 3 extremely good layouts, with those last 2 being the ones that I mostly see myself using. With all of these layouts though, you can actually shift the motherboard and power supply to a bunch of different heights, which is insane. 14 levels for the motherboard and 16 for the PSU, including being able to rotate it or move it to the front panel. So depending on the thickness of your fans or your graphics card, whether you want to run an AIO or not, you can just completely dial in and optimize the clearance and spacing of everything. Now, between the M1 and the M2, there was actually another Ncase called the M1 Evo, which is this thing right here. I actually never did a build or review of this thing because by the time I got my hands on it, the creator let me know that he was already making an updated model, so I honestly didn't bother. But yeah, I mean, side by side, they look extremely similar, but the closer you get, the more the differences become actually pretty obvious. The first thing that I noticed was the difference in the surface finish quality. The M2 is coming from a different factory, so it's a much nicer, super smooth finish. It's a lot closer to what you get on an Apple product, whereas the M1 Evo is kind of rough and patchy. It's not terrible by any means, but it's not personally what I'd go for. The M2 is also just a little bit bigger. I mean, you can barely see from this angle because it's not a massive difference, but it's actually mostly in the width. The M2 is now 10 millimeters wider than the M1 Evo, which means that you can now install CPU coolers like the Noctua D12L, which come in at 145 millimeters tall. You also get better GPU compatibility. There are some other small differences too, like the motherboard tray in the M2 is now a single solid piece. It now uses one type of screw for everything, which makes building a lot easier. The power supply bracket as well is now super overkill in the M2. It's this chunky CNC thing with no flex at all, and the front I/O is now completely locked in, not wobbly like it was on the M1 Evo. The M2 is also cheaper at $165 US, which is insane value for what you're getting. I mean, the quality of machining and the finish here is unheard of for that price. That's only $15 more than the Fractal Mood, which I just reviewed. Don't get me wrong, that thing was aesthetic, it was clean, but if we're talking about like the materials used, this thing is a different tier of PC case. Now to be fair, at that base price, you are getting a flat packed case, which you will need to spend a couple of minutes assembling, like the Form T1, and add-ons like the boosted case feed and the vertical riser cable will push the case closer to the $200 mark. But man, $165 for a base N-Case M2 is crazy, crazy value. And then there's this option here, which is even more expensive. This will land around the $230 mark, I've been told. But yeah, this thing looks really special in person. It kind of looks like a mini Apple Mac Pro, something that just looks super, super different. It's not the same cutout, hopefully the camera can do it justice, but yeah, still looks incredibly clean. I honestly think this thing could be your one and only PC case for a really long time. I highly doubt GPUs are going to get much bigger than they are now, and I don't see gaming CPUs needing more than a 280mm liquid cooler. Multi-GPU SLI systems have also been dead for a while, and you can now get multiple terabytes of storage on a single M.2 drive. RAM as well, I mean 32, 48 gig 2-stick kits are pretty common if you're buying DDR5. All of this stuff fits on an ITX board. So for my first build in this thing, let's just say it's a bit different from the old N-Case M1. It can seem a bit tricky and complex at times as well because there are so many options to do, but that is the trade-off of having so many different configurations in one case. I will eventually, of course, do a full step-by-step build guide on the M2, but I'm going to leave that for another video because I'm still exploring what does and doesn't fit in this case. For now though, I've gone with the Ryzen 7800X3D, cooled by the Thermalright Peerless Assassin Mini. I've got a 4090 FE up top, Corsair SF750 for the power supply, and then some extra case fans for cooling. I actually didn't have any slim 140mm fans up top, so I've just used 120s there for the time being, and then I've used an Arctic P14 to help with exhaust on the side. I have also used a custom 16-pin power cable from Mod DIY, which I'll link down below. It is pretty much necessary if you're going with a 4080 or 4090 FE in this build. I'd actually recommend going with their soft, flexible cable though instead, because this thicker sleeved one is right on the edge of the side panel not fitting. This is also one of the main advantages of the vertical riser kit. You've got a lot more GPU width clearance there. But yeah, this thing performs really, really well. The component and airflow setup that I have here is, funnily enough, almost identical to the Dan C4 SFX, which I tested a while back. Unfortunately, that case has been discontinued. But yeah, the temperatures are about the same as that as well. With my room at 23 degrees, I saw the 4090 sitting at around 71, 72, while pulling around 400 watts in Cyberpunk. But then when turning on DLSS, which is what I'd pretty much always do in this game anyway, you do get lower power draw, and there I was seeing mid to high 60s. This is exceptionally good for a build this compact, and it's not too different from what you'll see from most mid towers. I actually can't wait to do another build in the N-Case M2, and I'm already brainstorming all the crazy stuff that I'm going to do with this case. In a way, it kind of feels like the first PC case that's like a logical step over the formed T1. You know, I've done so many builds in the T1, and honestly, every time I build in that case, I'm just like, damn, nothing even comes close to this experience. For me, Now the Ncase M2 actually does. Like, of course, it is a much bigger PC case. You put them side by side, it is like a noticeable jump. But with that extra size, you are getting also a noticeable jump in GPU compatibility and cooling as well. Unfortunately, though, it is not exactly perfect. First of all, the cable which runs from the power button to your motherboard is too short for my specific build. Just where I need to route it, it barely reaches. Apparently, it's going to be lengthened for the next models, but yeah, I doubt that's going to be fixed for the first run. And then there's the user manuals, which for these products are just always bad for some reason. Like, they're just not that clear. So yeah, I doubt the M2 will get any kind of clear instructions on how to put it together. Personally, I would just rely on videos. And then lastly, at 165 bucks, yeah, I think the chances of getting one of these in stock, at least for the time being, is going to be very slim. So I would sign up for email notifications, do all of that stuff, and just be patient to get your hands on one. But yeah, there it is, the Ncase M2. If you want the smallest case that can fit the biggest GPUs, this is pretty much it. And as a bonus, you're getting the most premium build quality on the market by far.